Does your communication stink? Do you try to say something really important, but somehow it comes out all wrong, or the other people just completely misunderstand you and everything spirals downhill from there? I struggled with this for years until I found a completely new way to communicate, and I can honestly say that this new approach completely changed my life. I'm Nicola, and for the last 25 years I've been exploring ways to release my issues and break my patterns of pain so I don't repeat the cycle, and I'd love to help you do the same. My communication stank for many, many years, especially intense or difficult situations. I just didn't know how to get the message across without creating bad feelings or making things worse. And so I'd get into fights with my husband because I just didn't know how to express myself effectively. I wasn't getting my needs across in a way that actually allowed him to hear it. And at work and in friendships, I just leave so many things unsaid because I didn't know how to communicate, and I just couldn't be bothered dealing with the fallout if it did end up making things worse. So I just didn't say anything, but you end up simmering, carrying that stuff with you. But the key moment came when our first child was about 3 years old, and we found ourselves speaking to him the same way that our parents spoke to us. Our parents' words were coming out of our mouths, and we were horrified, and we knew in that moment something had to change. Comment below, what is the worst thing that you've said to a child, either your own kids or someone else's? Because we've all been there, we've all said awful things to kids. And so in that moment of knowing that something had to change, we went looking for solutions, and we signed up for a program called Parent Effectiveness Training. And one of the things it included was a communication approach called Nonviolent communication. It's a totally new way of approaching the way that you communicate. And so we started using this, and we felt completely awkward. It was like we were learning to speak all over again, and we followed the steps of this framework almost robotically, but it was really uncomfortable to begin with. But we stuck with it and we practiced it, and we were doing it for the kids. We wanted to give our kids a better experience. But the biggest shock came when it actually totally transformed our communication between myself and my husband. We just couldn't believe that now we had a way that we could talk to each other about stuff that was going on for us without raising each other's hackles, and that we could actually work towards finding resolutions that satisfied both of us, and it completely changed our lives. Our proudest moment came when our then about 4-year-old son used NVC with us. He said something like, "When you stand there, I can't see the television." And we were so proud. My heart almost burst because it was worth all of that struggle and awkwardness and challenge and relearning to be able to model this way of communicating that he had then picked up from us and just started using. It was magical. So what is nonviolent communication, or NVC? Well, it's a way of communicating that was developed by Marshall Rosenberg. He was a psychologist back in the 60s. He grew up in the era of social and racial tension and violence, and he wanted to find a better way to resolve these high tension conflict situations. He even took a job as a taxi driver, apparently, so that he could practice this new approach to communication, and he took it into all kinds of situations and showed the impact it could have. And I've got a guide that takes you step by step through the process of nonviolent communication that you can download, and includes lots of tips and traps to help you make the most of it as you go learning through this process. But basically, it's communicating with compassion. It's about developing an understanding of everyone in that situation, what needs they have, how we can best meet those needs, and find solutions that work for everyone. It's about putting aside violence in our thinking. It's not about someone winning the situation. It's about everyone coming away with their needs met. And a really great model that they use when they teach NVC is the idea of the giraffe versus the jackal. So the giraffe has a big heart and a long neck, and that represents the open-heartedness and the compassionate approach. And also the long neck is the long-term view, the looking ahead, trying to find solutions that work ongoing. Whereas the jackal reflects the idea of blame and criticism and judgment and negativity. And so that's a really good way to think about the two different styles of communication. And NVC has been taught successfully and used in prisons, in high conflict situations like war or racial tension, to resolve those situations peacefully. It's been taught in classrooms and workplaces, and it's been shown to be so effective at creating successful outcomes, satisfactory resolutions to so many different kinds of situations. So NVC is based on 4 assumptions: that humans have an innate capacity for compassion. We can do this. We just need to create the environment and the conditions and have the skills to be able to connect to that compassion for each other. And secondly, that we all have basic human needs that we are trying to meet, and we share those needs. They're all common to us. We share those needs. We're not trying to do anything particularly radical. We all have these needs that we're trying to meet in these situations of conflict. And the third part is that this conflict arrives not from the need, but from the way that we're trying to meet that need, whether that's the strategy we're using or the way that we're communicating about that need. That's what leads to the conflict. And so the fourth assumption is that successful outcomes come from collaboration, not dominance. Not about someone winning and someone losing, but about finding ways that everybody wins. So how do we use NVC? Well, it comes into play when we need to ask something of someone, or we're trying to express a need. It has 4 key parts: observation, feelings, needs, and requests. So the basic framework looks something like, when you do A, I feel B, and I need C, so would you be willing to do D? And that was the basic awkward framework that my husband and I used when we first started learning this, putting what we were trying to communicate into that 4-step framework. And I want to give you some examples so that you can better understand how you actually use NVC in day-to-day situations. So let's say instead of saying, oh, this house is a pigsty, could you put your stuff away? You could say something like, when you leave your clothes all over the floor, I feel really frustrated because I need to live in a tidy house. Would you be willing to put them in a laundry basket instead? Or you could say, instead of, why are you eating all that rubbish? You'll never be healthy if you eat like that. You could say something like, I'm worried that you're not getting enough nutrition from your diet and I want you to be healthy. Would you be willing to take a multivitamin to fill in the gaps? Some other examples: I feel really scared when you shout at the kids and I want them and me to feel safe. Would you be willing to use a gentler tone of voice? Or when I see you on the phone when I'm talking, I feel anxious because I need to feel heard. Would you be willing to put your phone aside while I'm talking to you? Or I feel overwhelmed when you stand so close to me. Could you please stand back a little way? Or I'm sad that you changed our catch-up time at the last minute because I was really looking forward to seeing you and I'm feeling very disappointed right now. Would you be able to make a time that you can stick to? So you can see from those examples that you don't have to stick to that 4-part structure exactly. There's definitely flexibility in how you use those different pieces. But when you're first starting out and learning how to use it, it does make it easier to stick with that 4-part framework. But there's definitely flexibility as you get more skilled with it to adapt it, to not use certain parts, to judge from the situation which pieces are going to be the most useful given what you're trying to communicate. And there are some traps that you can fall into to be aware of. Firstly is expressing insincere or fake feelings. And usually this involves going into your head instead of being in your body and feeling what you're feeling. So saying things like, I feel that you are being XYZ, or I feel that this means. So you're thinking and judging and interpreting rather than actually expressing your genuine feelings about the situation. The next is to actually move into judgments instead of, or disguising judgments as statements of feelings, like I feel attacked. Using that word interprets the behaviour of the other person. So what we're trying to do is express how we feel. I feel scared, I feel anxious, I feel unsafe, I feel fearful. We're trying to focus on what we can unequivocally say is our experience without necessarily trying to translate what it means that the other person is doing. Another issue that we can have is making vague requests. I need you to be nicer. What does that mean? How do you even know whether you've successfully achieved that? So being concrete and specific with requests is really important here. And also making requests with the understanding that it's okay for the other person to say no. So making a request, not a demand. Not saying you have to do X. Saying, would you be willing to do this? Allow for the possibility they may actually say no. And that has to be okay, because that just means there's more to communicate, more things to go back and forth with to find a solution that works for everyone. It's also important to keep it relevant. So when you're talking about NVC, you're talking about an action the other person has taken, how it makes you feel and the need you're trying to meet and what you would like instead. We're not dragging what happened yesterday or last week or 3 months ago or 10 years ago. We're trying to stick to the topic at hand, the specific need, the specific action, and specific solutions to meet that situation. So keep it relevant, keep it focused, and you're more likely to have success in finding solutions using this method. But if you can't, if you feel like the other person isn't hearing you or they're not receptive to your requests, you may need to switch into active listening. So active listening is where you give them space to express what's going on for them. You are fully present, you are listening to what's going on, but you're also mirroring back to them what they're saying to you. So you're making sure you understand what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what's going on for them. And when they feel heard and acknowledged, they may feel more receptive to your requests and your communication. And so you can switch back and forth between active listening and making NVC statements in order to get solutions and to communicate effectively. What you're doing here is you're aiming for clarity. You're trying to understand what your experience is, but also what their experience is. And once you both have understanding of what's going on, you can then work together to find solutions. When you start talking like this, using the NVC framework, people are likely to look at you sideways. They're used to you talking a certain way, using certain ways of expressing yourself, and then you start doing this differently, and they're going to look at you like either you're weird or maybe you're trying to manipulate them. And so you can take a moment then to explain to them all about NVC, or you could just say something like, I'm trying to improve the way I communicate, and I'd really appreciate it if you could be patient while I try out some new approaches to see if I can make things better. And so as you practice NVC with the people around you, you will start to foster compassion because you're opening your heart, you're actually listening, you're working to understand what everyone needs in the situation. And then you will develop collaboration because you're cooperating, you're working together, trying to find solutions. And this will result in deeper connections between you and the people you're working through with this. So make sure to download that guide to NVC that I have created for you, because it's going to make it so much easier as you try to put this new way of communicating into practice, and to help you avoid some of those tips, some of those traps, and some tips to make it more effective as you are trying to figure out how to use this amazing technique. And like I say, learning NVC and using it in my own life completely changed everything. So I really recommend you give it a try. And if you want to understand better how you can react with intention, respond with intention instead of reacting on autopilot when you do get into difficult situations, watch this video next. And I'll see you in the next one.